Pennebaker of the University of Texas at Austin, and he'll be talking about using functional words to understand people, groups, and culture.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here, partly because this is a very different audience that I usually speak to, and I'll be curious to get a sense from many of you about how some of this work ties into the issues of evolution and culture. By way of background, I'm a social psychologist, but a social psychologist who doesn't fit in very well anyplace. My real interest over the years has been, among other things, kind of the nature of communication. And if you think about the nature of communication, the way we interact with others, we generally think that one of the primary goals of language is to transmit information in some kind of conscious way. That is, light fire or things like that. Let's go hunt. And when we think about language, we're focusing on content. And in fact, this idea of conveying content is really at the heart of everything from kind of the evolutionary perspective, but to Google as well. If you want to figure out how to find this meeting, apparently you could write, I want to know where UCLA's BEC meetings take place. And you'd get the same answer as if you just said UCLA BEC. And the point is that the way we generally think about language is focusing on content. And today what I'll talk about is the nature of language when it's not highly specific content, but rather focuses on the nature of linguistic style. And I think it might be useful to give you a little bit of background to this way of thinking by kind of giving you a sense of how I got where I am. About 25 years ago, I stumbled across a really interesting finding. And that is when people reported having a traumatic experience in their lives, they ended up having far more health problems afterwards if they kept that trauma secret than if they talked to others. I became really obsessed with this, trying to figure out why this was. And then at some point it occurred to me, would it be possible to bring people in the laboratory and have them in some way disclose this trauma? Or disclose this, especially if it's a secret, would that have a positive effect on physical health? And so we started to do these experiments where we would bring people in the laboratory, we randomly assign them to either write about a traumatic experience or write about superficial topics, and we'd have them write for 15 minutes a day for 4 days. And what we found in those early studies was those people who were randomly assigned to write about traumatic experiences ended up going to the student health center about half the rates as people in the control conditions. And then other studies were done by us and by others, looking at immune function. So we draw blood before the assignment condition after the last day of writing, several weeks later. Other people started doing work on wound healing. And in the last 25 years, there have been over 300 articles published using this method, this expressive writing method. And it's associated with changes in physical health, mental health. It's associated with behavioral changes. People do better in college when they write about emotionally relevant topics. Now, one of the questions that underlies all of this is, what is it about putting things into words that makes a difference? And I should say there have now been many labs trying to answer this question, and the reality is the answer is there are a lot of things. It's probably a whole cascade of things that occur. There are cognitive changes, there are emotional changes, and there are also some interesting social changes. But the road that I ended up going down in dealing with this question was looking at the writing itself. Could you actually look at what people wrote and get a sense of who would benefit versus who wouldn't benefit? And to do this, we first had judges read these essays. And what we would find is that our idea was maybe there's certain ways that people write that would be more beneficial. Maybe if people talked about certain types of topics. And we were doing the kind of things that most people do, which is we focused on content and maybe the degree to which they expressed emotion, words, things like that. Well, the problem was that judges just didn't agree. When individuals are writing about horrible traumatic experiences, judges have real problems agreeing on much of anything. And even worse, it was a very slow, painful process to get judge ratings. And finally, we discovered that when we had people read a lot of these depressing traumas, it ended up depressing our judges. And so we had to kind of do therapy for our judges. In other words, this was not a very effective strategy. So I figured what we needed was a computer program that would go through and analyze text. And I couldn't find one that was available at the time, so working with one of my graduate students, Martha Francis, we ended up writing a computer program called Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, LIWC, which we pronounce Luke. And the Luke program would go in and would identify, and we had to train this with the judges, we would look for words, it would count the percentage of words in any given text were positive emotion words, negative emotion words, various classes of cognitive words, and content dimensions, death and anxiety and sexuality and so forth. And as long as you're doing this, you find it's just as easy to add more categories. So we threw in pronouns and articles and prepositions and various other things. So we went back and started analyzing our earlier data, and we started to discover some interesting things. First of all, the content of what people were writing about had no predictive ability in terms of looking at changes in people's health. It was more stylistic things. So for example, one thing we found was that words that suggested the construction of a story over time. There's certain kinds of words that we found that was identified with the construction of a story. Some of these words were cognitive words, words like because, cause, effect, reason, rationale, or what we called insight words, words like understand, realize, know, meaning such as that. If there was an increase in these words over time, people's health improved. Whereas people, if they came into the experiment with a clear story, they didn't benefit. They had to construct a story. It wasn't just having a story that was beneficial. And another thing we found was that when people wrote, if there was a change in their perspectives across the 4 days of writing, their health improved. And changes in perspective we inferred from the way people would use pronouns. So that if people used a high rate of, say, I, me, and my on one day, and the next day they would make references to he, she, they, etc., and the next day they switch and flip and go back and forth, those people benefited by far more than people who didn't. In other words, they both pointed to this importance of changing stories, changing perspectives, and those were the things that were important. Now, about this time, I was also downloading huge amounts of data, and I was trying just to get a picture of what we can tell about people from language. And I was on a flight somewhere, and I was reading a wonderful book that came out in 1995 called The Science of Words by George Miller. And in this book, he makes this distinction that I'd never heard of, which was the distinction between essentially of content words and function words. Content words are words that are, by and large, nouns, regular verbs, adjectives, some adverbs. They're words that are conveying the basic content of what people are saying. And then there's this group of words called function words. And function words are the kind of words that all of us ignore, we find boring, we don't get. And if you're trying to learn another language, they're the hardest ones to master. These are words like pronouns, prepositions, articles, conjunctions, auxiliary verbs, negations, kind of the detritus of words. And what's interesting about these function words is they're not very many. In English, there are probably 500, only of which 180 are quite common. And these 180 words account for about 55% of all the words we hear, we read, we say. In other words, this small group of words account for most of the words in our vocabularies. And by the way, they account for less than, far less than 1% of all the words we even know. Now there's a couple of other things that were interesting about these words. And one of this is that these function words are processed in the brain differently than content words. So for example, we know that for most people, the language areas tend to be in the left brain. And there are two areas that have attracted the most attention, especially when we're looking at stroke differences. And one area is Broca's area, which is in the frontal lobe, and the other is Wernicke's area, which is in the temporal lobe. And you get really different errors or problems when these two areas are damaged. So for example, if Broca's area is damaged by a stroke and Wernicke's is working just fine, The way that a person speaks is, is quite distinctive. So for example, if I ask somebody to describe this table area, that person would say, glass, water, sits, desk, white paper. They would be socially awkward, they'd speak slowly, and they would be labeling things. They'd be using nouns and regular verbs. Now, if you had damage to Wernicke's area, but their frontal lobe is functioning just fine, you could ask them to describe this, and they will be very different. First of all, they'll be socially connected. They will pay attention to you. They'll say, oh, okay, sure. Well, this is right here, and it's right next to that, and over there is this, and it's right above that. And all of their language is essentially function words. It used to be called a word salad, but this salad is actually kind of an interesting mixture. Now, there's one other feature of function words that's really critical, and that is they are inherently social. And this turns out, oh, by the way, I also want to emphasize, Broca's area is frontal lobe. And we know the frontal lobe is linked to social behaviors, to personality processes, and so forth. And so it might not be so strange that these function words are particularly relevant for social behavior. Now, let me give you a couple of other examples. Here's a glass of water. In a few minutes, I might make some references to the glass of water, and all of us knows what it is. After this talk, you might go someplace and you say, oh yeah, listen to Pennebaker, he talked about the glass of water. And your friend will say, what do you mean, the glass of water? The word "the" is a word that has specific meaning in this situation right now, and as soon as this gathering is over, that will now disappear. The glass of water, that "the" is only shared between us right now. Or you can imagine you find a piece of paper on the ground that says, I'm not here, I'll be back real soon. Again, on one level it makes sense, on another level it makes no sense at all. I'm not here, who's I? Am implies present tense, when was it written? Not here, where is here? Because it may have blown here. The fact is, these are words, all function words, or most function words, are shared between the speaker and the audience at a particular time. Now we can start to stand back, because by analyzing these function words, we can start to get a sense of a person's psychological and social worlds. It can give us a sense of the degree to which, how they're connected with their topic and how they're connected with others. And that's what I essentially want to talk about, to give you just a sense of some of the many studies that my lab but other labs have been doing in looking at these function words to get a sense of their power in revealing the nature of individuals. Let me just start off with one of the most intriguing ones. Let's look at sex differences. Do men and women talk differently? And the answer, of course, is yes. Do they use function words differently? The answer is yes. And in fact, I can go into any of these journals, or I can go into newspapers, I can go into blogs or whatever, run it through my computer program, and I can do a pretty good job telling you if any given article, if any given blog, any given letter, it was written by a male or a female. So here's some of the big differences. And what I love about this is how terrible we are at knowing. So for example, who uses first person singular, I, me, and my more? In fact, let me ask you all, because I've asked this of linguists, I've asked this of psychologists, I've asked this of experts all over the world, across languages and so forth. And I'm curious to see how you do. First of all, let me see, how many of you are anthropologists? Okay, good. So I'm going to be looking at you guys especially, because psychologists, I know they don't know. Okay. I, me, and my. Who uses I, me, and my more, men or women? How many think men use I words more? How many think men use them more? Okay. Let's say emotion words. How many think men use emotion words more? How many think women do? Okay. Articles, a, an, and the. How many think men use articles more? How many think women do? Okay, we've got some non-voters here. How about cognitive words? Words like because, cause, effect, reason, rationale. How many think men use cognitive words more? How many think women do? Okay, social words, he, she, we, etc. How many think men use social words more? How many think women do? Okay. Actually, you guys do a little bit better than the average audience. Maybe anthropology is the way of the future. Here's the answer sheet. Women use I words at far, far higher rates than men do. And many people say, but wait, men are arrogant and self-centered. Well, yes, they might be, but that doesn't mean that they use I words more. Pronouns tell us where people are paying attention. The use of the word I suggests self-focus. So if your attention is drawn to yourself for any reason, the person uses I more. If they're self-conscious, if they're anxious, if they're afraid, if they're not if they're angry, if they are depressed, or if they are in physical pain, people use the word I more. It's a marker of self-reflection. We words, we, us, and our. There is no difference between men and women because we is two different words. One is the we of you and I together, we love one another, it's a beautiful world, and maybe women use that one a little bit more. But then there's this other we, which is the we I use with my graduate students. So I'll say, student, you know, we need to analyze that data. And that doesn't really mean you and I will sit in front of the computer together and analyze it. It really means you will analyze the data. And in fact, in many contexts, we is a really interesting word because you're using it almost as a psychologically distancing mechanism. Emotion words, turns out there's no difference. Men and women use emotion words at the same rate. Cognitive words, women use cognitive words at far higher rates than men did. And this brings us up, articles. I'll tell you why cognitive words are interesting in just a second after I tell you about articles. Articles, men use articles at incredibly high rates compared to women. And the reason is articles are put in front of concrete nouns. And if you have a concrete noun, it means you're talking about a specific object or thing. Social words, you were right, women use social words at much higher rates. And what all of this is telling us is that if you're talking about other people versus you're talking about objects and things, you're thinking about the world differently. And you're also coming up with different mental models. And one of these we see in the use of cognitive words. Cognitive words are interesting because we use these cognitive words like because, cause, effect, and so forth, when we're trying to explain complex things. Human relationships are really, really complex. Why is John having a relationship with Sally when everybody knows Sally doesn't like him and she's interested in Fred? Now that discussion is incredibly complex. Think of all the dimensions of cognitive complexity there. And then you've got two guys talking about a carburetor. The carburetor, broken. The models to describe that are not nearly as complex as the human relationships. So what we can start doing is looking at any given text and start to see these differences. Now, we see these differences in sex differences. And the sex differences are modestly robust. With computer programs, we can go through and identify sex maybe 74% of the time, where 50% is chance, just by looking at these function words. But we also find big differences in social class, age, yeah.
Just to be clear, your subjects are all from the United States?
No, they're all over the world. We've done most of these big projects that I've done have been in English, but from all over the world in English.
Large scale societies, big cities, or?
These big projects, these are people who blog. So wherever they are, we will use them. And we found comparable effects with Spanish blogs and German blogs. And we're starting to find very similar things even with Chinese text as well. Now, what's also interesting is we get big social class differences. We get big age differences. And some of the age differences are kind of interesting, so that, and these are both cohort samples as well as samples of people that we track over the course of their lives. These will usually be published authors, and we get the same pattern. The older people get, the more they use positive emotions, and the less they use negative emotions. The older they get, the more they use future tense, and the less they use past tense. The older we get, the more we use more complex words, and also the older we get, the less we use first-person singular, I, me, and my. We tend to, as we get older, we tend to start using we more. And I find this very interesting. It fits in with a lot of questionnaire studies on aging, showing that as people get older, they become less neurotic, they become more kind of psychologically healthy. And what's nice about it is we can go back to looking at the collected works of Shakespeare, we can go back and look at Milton and others, and you see the same general patterns with people across time that we have access to, that we know that they were writing for 20 or more years. Now, some other things that are interesting. One is we've done a lot of studies, and others have now as well, looked at deception. Can you tell if someone's telling the truth versus lying by the way they use words? And some of these studies are studies where we induce people to lie or tell the truth, almost like parlor games. Others, we've done some studies where we got data from court transcripts of people who were all found guilty, but half of whom were exonerated through DNA or other evidence. Across all these studies, we find that people who are telling the truth tend to use I words at much higher rates than people who don't, or who are lying. When people lie, they tend to kind of psychologically distance themselves. They do not use I. They're also more complex when they're telling the truth. They use words, we call them exclusive words. These are words, conjunctions, and some prepositions, where people use words such as except, without, exclude, not, but, where they're making a distinction between what is in a category and what's not in a category. And when somebody's telling the truth, that's exactly what they do. They say, yes, well, last night I was going to the store, but instead I thought I needed to do this, so instead I did this, and so forth. A person who is lying tends to over-include. Another thing that we've been interested in, and that's the nature of status, power and status. Can you tell, if we look at a group of people and got a court transcript or a transcript, could you tell who is the high status person versus the lowest status, and those in the middle? And the answer is yes. We've done a whole series of studies where we've analyzed emails between people, informal groups, more formal groups, and the most striking thing is looking at the relative use of the word I. The higher status person uses the word I less, and the lower status tends to use the word I more. And these are not subtle effects. These are big effects. I'd done our first analysis. We had a small email sample and saw these huge effects, and I thought, that can't be true for me, because, I love everybody. So I went through and analyzed my data, and my data were exactly like everyone else, and they were huge. And I encourage you to go look yourself. You'll be deeply discouraged. So an undergraduate writes me, "Dear Dr. Pennebaker, I am so-and-so, and I am doing this, and I'm wondering if I could do this." And I'll write back, "Dear student, thank you so much for your email. Unfortunately, da-da-da-da-da." And then I look at my email to the dean. "Dear Dean, I'm Jamie Pennebaker, and I want this, and I need this." And the dean writes back, "Dear Jamie, thank you so much for your email. Unfortunately, da-da-da-da." Now, it's really quite striking because everybody is completely friendly. No one's insulting anybody. It just happens. And I is a really interesting word. It gets to this idea of focus of attention. It's almost like the dog rolling over, burying its neck, basically saying, I. And the big dog is sitting there thinking, well, I don't know if I want to bite the neck or whatever. The big dog's not really being self-aware, whereas the submissive dog is. Now, one of the things that I've gone into over the last 3 or 4 years, stuff I'm most excited about, is starting to look at ongoing natural interactions among people. What can we tell about individuals when they're interacting in terms of, are they thinking alike, are they on the same page, do they like one another, and so forth? And looking at this, we've devised a method that we call language style matching, or LSM. Language style matching is a metric that I wanted to make it a real simple metric. And what we did was we essentially came up with a metric whereby we calculate the percentage of words that are function words that are used at comparable rates. So we look at the degree to which two people are using personal pronouns, impersonal pronouns, selected adverbs, prepositions, articles, etc., about 8 different dimensions of function words. And if they're using them at comparable rates, and we end up with a metric that goes from essentially 0 to 1.0, with 1.0, the two people using these at exactly the same rates, and 0, not at all. Most of the numbers usually between 0.5 and 0.95. And we've looked at this across a number of dimensions. First of all, one thing that's interesting about this style matching is it occurs just like that within an interaction. Usually when you talk to a stranger, you talk to a friend, in the first 30 seconds, the two of you start talking alike. And it's really quite interesting how that works. And if you track a conversation over time, it's very high at the beginning and it gradually drops over the next 5 to 10 minutes. Almost during that first part, the two of you are paying really close attention to one another, you're mirroring what each other says, and then as you become more comfortable, you don't pay as close attention and each of you start to tell your own stories. But it's also a marker of the degree to which the two people are engaged. So for example, one study that I particularly like is one that I did with Eli Finkel and others, looking at speed dating. Speed dating for a social psychologist is the most glorious thing ever invented, because what you do is you have a meaningful social interaction, or a whole series of them that you can get done really quickly. So with these, there were about, each session would have about 10 people, 10 males, 10 females. These were all heterosexual speed dates. And you could have all the males sitting down, then all the females come in and they sit down with the guy and they talk for 4 minutes and they have 1 minute to make ratings and they move to the next person and so forth. With these, we had a tape recorder and they knew that there was a tape recorder there. And our question was, would the two people match? Now by matching, that means at the end of the day, they would send in an email saying who would they like to share personal information with. And most people want to share information with substantially less than half the people in the group. Here's what I love. By doing this language style matching, we could predict who would match at rates higher than the people themselves. And one reason for that is often you'll have one person who thought, wow, that relationship was great, and the other person was saying, not so much. The style matching statistic is actually picking up how they're actually connecting. We did another project. This was with 86 couples. It was part of another study. And these were usually first-year college student couples. And they had to be dating at least 6 months. And I should say first-year college couples are really unstable, which again, from a psychologist's perspective, is wonderful. And what we would, to be in our study, they had to give us 10 days of their instant messages back and forth with each other. What we found is that we did a shockingly good job at predicting whether or not they'd still be together 3 months later. Far, far, far better than they did. In fact, their self-reports about their relationship were just slightly above 0. But just doing a median split of this style matching, those people who were above average on style matching, 80% were still together 3 months later. Those in the bottom half of style matching, only about 52% were still together 3 months later. In other words, this style matching does a really nice job at just kind of tracking a relationship. Now there's one other place that we started looking at this, and that is looking at working groups. We started, some of our earliest work just dealt with people that we would assign to work together on tasks. Sometimes they'd be face-to-face, sometimes they'd be, and didn't be transcribed, others they would be typed. And most of our current work is actually typed, groups that are typing. And what we found, we had various outcome measures, usually hard behavioral measures. And what we found was that this style matching does a good job at predicting whether or not the group at the end says it was a cohesive group, but also markers of productivity, that they tend to be more productive. So we had some tasks where they had to work together on a task, and we had some kind of outcome measure. Most recently, we've moved this idea to educational groups. I teach very large introductory psychology classes with a colleague of mine, Sam Gosling. And he and I have been teaching intro psych this way for several years. A year ago, we decided to to radically change the way we teach introductory psychology. We'd always taught 2 back-to-back classes of 500 students each. We'd be up on stage, and we'd both be mic'd up, and it was kind of a show. And what we did was we changed it so that students would actually come and they'd have to bring a computer every day to class. We gave them a test every day. It really changed all the rules. But one thing that we also did was we would occasionally have chats. We'd break the class into small groups of usually 5 or 6 people and have them talk with each other about the topic at hand. Now sometimes some of our earliest work with this is we would tell them that they were going to be tested on a particular topic, and there would be assigned reading. So they'd come to class, and then they would take an individual practice test of 10 items, and then they'd be thrust into a room with 4 others, and they would talk about the test and the questions and so forth for the next 20 minutes, and then they'd have to take a test again, and this test counted toward their final grade. Well, we did all these initial analyses to get a sense of what features of language predict better performance. And some of these were interesting. One of them was the more the group style matched, the higher their LSM, the better the group worked. And LSM in this setting is a marker of how much people are paying attention. If they're by the way, people who are in an argument, they have very high style matching. People who really like one another have very high style matching. It's a marker of engagement. It's not a marker of liking. It often is a marker of liking, but it can be any. We were also able to look at other things. How positive they were had no effect. We were able to look at the degree to which they stayed on topic. And you can look at how a group has stayed on topic by looking at their use of articles, because the more people are using articles, the more they're talking about concrete objects and things or topics, and the less they use pronouns and auxiliary verbs, because pronouns and auxiliary verbs are markers of social things. And that was related to how they did on the tests. Our next assignments, we created a system so that our computer was constantly monitoring the group. So this was the Luke program, could monitor the group as it was talking. And every 2 to 3 minutes, we could give feedback to the group to now try to change the group dynamics. So we would track, say, their style matching. And every 2 or 3 minutes, we would give feedback. And it would be, usually it would be honest feedback. This honest feedback's a little complicated. We screwed up some of our metrics, so it turns out some of it wasn't as honest as we had hoped, but we weren't actively trying to deceive them. But the feedback would be, if their style matching was high, we'd say, it looks as though you all are really paying attention to one another, keep up the good work, or all the way down to, you all are, and we had educated them about style matching. Your style matching score was a 0.6. This is a sign that you're not paying enough attention to others. Really work to listen more to what the other people are saying. And then we could also give them feedback of, are you staying on topic? The analyses of your language suggest that you're not staying on topic and so forth. But what we find is by giving this feedback, we can in fact we can change the dynamics of the group and improve the performance. And these are some of the directions that we're now starting to go, where for the first time, we're starting to harness the nature of language and shape how the group is working. Now this brings up 2 or 3 points I want to close on before we just have a general discussion. The first is, what is the relationship between word use and psychological state? That is, do the words we use drive psychological state, or does psychological state merely is it reflected in the words we use? This is actually a really interesting question. And as far as function words go, we have tried many, many times to manipulate words in terms of how people speak and see if it changes their psychological state. We have never succeeded. We can get people to change their words. So if I give you a question, we did one study, I love this study. We gave students a survey saying, well, it's now close to the end of the school year, and it's important to get a sense of what today's students are thinking. Here's what 3 people said about their first year college experience. And the first one was, when we came to the university, we really thought it would be this way, but instead we learned this. But overall, I think all of us who are here find this a good experience. And then there'd be one who would have ambivalent views, the other would say it was pretty bad. But in all those cases, it was all first-person plural is the way they're writing, which is kind of a goofy way of writing, but nobody ever raised a question. And then we would have examples for the other half of the people, and they were all first-person singular. And then we'd say, what are your experiences? And turns out, if they have been primed with the we, they answer in we, and the other group, they answer in I. Does it make any difference in their sense of identity, their sense of anything? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And we tried doing this every way possible. I feel pretty certain that the use of function words is reflecting psychological state as opposed to driving it. It's much like telling somebody who's about to go into a group. You can tell someone about to go into a group, and you could tell them, when you go in and you're talking to everybody, never use first person singular, only use first person plural, or don't use pronouns at all. Now that's one of the highlights of someone who becomes a leader. They can do it. Will they become the leader? Probably at base rates. However, if I tell the person, I want you to go in there and I want you to try to become the leader of the group, if the person's so motivated, the probability they'll become the leader is much, much higher, and their language will change accordingly. Again, language is following the psychological state. A second issue, and this is going to be relevant to our discussion afterwards. Function words are almost invisible. You can't hear them. I'm sure some of you over the last 40 minutes have been listening just briefly in terms of the words I've been using. But you couldn't pay attention very long. It's almost impossible. Have I used the word I at high rates or low rates? I've got no idea myself. You've got no idea. We can't hear them. Now, I think I can say I'm one of the world experts on pronouns and prepositions and articles. If you talk to me, I can't hear it. So don't feel self-conscious if you have a question. I get these emails all the time, Dear Dr. Pennebaker, and they will ask something at the end. P.S. I've spent 30 minutes composing this email so that people won't, come across, and I don't even know how they're supposed to come across, but I didn't see it. I mean, this is what's so interesting. I can give you 2 essays, one that is just filled with I's, the other one has virtually none, and then I have you read them, and I pull them away, and I say, which one has more I's? You won't know. I've done things in my lab where we were trying to look at this with pronouns or whatever, and we all know that one group is very high and one is another one, and we will get into an argument which is which, and we'll have to actually count to be sure that we're right, because we're usually not. And that's what makes this so interesting. So they're almost invisible. The final thing is, I think these are interesting because they give us a tool that we normally don't have. Think of the methods. I can speak about the methods we have in psychology. Psychology has spent way too much time with questionnaires and self-reports. And the questionnaire self-report approach doesn't give us access to history. It doesn't give us access to politicians or other people that we can't give questionnaires to. But language is such a rich method that it gives us access to the past and to hard-to-get populations. One final thing that I want to push, especially for those of you who do in fact use questionnaires. At the bottom of all your questionnaires, do me a favor and have several places for open-ended responses. And I say that because open-ended responses will be able to be analyzed now and in the future in ways that are unimaginable. The way that we can think about language today is remarkable compared to 20 years ago. And what's being developed in computational linguistics, in Google and others, is giving us ways of getting into the minds of people that we've never had access to. So even if you can't analyze it now, I would urge you to collect it so in the future somebody else can. I could actually talk about all this stuff for ages. So, but I'm going to stop here, and I'd like to open this up to a discussion.